We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to eradicating human slavery, human trafficking, child exploitation, and child sexual abuse material through disrupting networks and applying data technology and advanced analytics and intelligence.
Hi, welcome everyone to the Darkweb panel as part of the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative conference. My name is Chris Poulter. I'm the founder and CEO of OSINT Combine. I come from a military background and do an extensive amount of work with my team in philanthropic efforts supporting both counter human trafficking and counter child abuse through both our training, our software platform, and what we do in our services area. Today with me, very honored to have a distinguished panel with Richard Brooks, Keven Hendricks, and Carolina Christofoletti. I'm going to go through a quick introduction to the specialists we have on the panel today, and then we're going to get kicked into a few questions to start exploring some of the things that are happening in and around the darknets related to CSAM and human trafficking. So to get started, I'm going to introduce Dr. Richard Brooks. Mr. Brooks is a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Clemson University in South Carolina. He received a PhD in computer science from Louisiana State University and a BA in mathematical science from Johns Hopkins. Dr. Brooks' security research funded by the U.S. Department of State developed secure communication tools being used by activists and journalists avoiding repression by authoritarian regimes. His group won the IEEE blockchain and pharmaceuticals competition. Clemson is pursuing a patent for his work using DLT for symmetric key distribution. Dr. Brooks is recording Secretary of IEEE 2418-3, Working Group Drafting International DLT Standards for Use in Agriculture. Dr. Brooks is Associate Editor of Elsevier Computers and Security and ACM Distributed Ledgers. He wrote the books Distributed Security Technologies with Mobile Code and Peer-to-Peer Networks, Distributed Denial of Service Attacks, and Introduction to Computer Network Security, Navigating Shades of Grey. Thanks very much, Dr. Brooks, for joining us today. Very honored to have you as part of the panel. The next guest is Keven Hendricks. He's a 16-year veteran detective with a municipal police department and has served as a task force officer for 2 separate federal agencies. He's a published author with the FBI Law Enforcement Bulletin and American Police Beat, and currently works as an instructor for street cop training in Noble, teaching a class of law enforcement on dark web and cybercrime investigations. He's a certified cybercrime examiner and a certified cybercrime investigator by the National White Collar Crime Center, a certified cryptocurrency investigator through the Blockchain Intelligence Group, and a certified digital asset professional through the Global Digital Asset and Cryptocurrency Alliance. He's the founder of the Ubivis project, StopDarkWebDrugs.com. Thanks very much, Keven, for joining us. Again, very honored to have you on the panel today.
Thank you, Chris.
Our final panelist is Carolina Christofoletti. She leads TRM's Child Sex Abuse Material, or CSAM, blockchain intelligence efforts as part of TRM's threat intelligence team. She adopts a public approach to her work, striving for constantly improved intelligence sharing cooperation practices in CSAM matters, combined with a research-based approach towards CSAM data. Prior to joining TRM Labs, she focused extensively on CSAM in the academic realm, starting at University of Sao Paulo, where she received her law degree. She continues her role as a CSAM researcher at the IGCSE working group, where she researches CSAM networks in partnership with national and international law enforcement agencies. She holds a similar role at the Institute for Advanced Studies at University of Sao Paulo, where she researches CSAM trust and safety. Christofoletti holds an LLM on international crime, transitional justice of peace procedures from the University of Columbia, a master's degree of criminal compliance from the University of Mancha, and a master degree on cybercrime from the University of Nebrija, and an LLM in digital forensics at IPOG. Well, thanks very much, Carolina. Really looking forward to the wealth of knowledge that you'll be able to share with the panel today. Okay, well, we're going to get straight into it. So we're going to start with a question probably directed at Keven, and then we're going to start the flow from there. So Keven, looking at current trends involving darknets and illicit activities, what are you seeing from a CSAM and human trafficking perspective, and what insights can you sort of share in that space?
Yeah, I would say in the past 6 months, there's been kind of a migration towards I2P, the Invisible Internet Project. Tor had some network issues that were documented in the darknet circles late last year, where there was some stability questions, and we see a lot more people now being comfortable using I2P. I2P specifically updated its entire network. It's now I2P plus within the past couple months. And we have darknet markets that are now solely having a presence on I2P. One of the first markets that did this really successfully was Alphabet. And the admin, who is now since been missing, no one knows if he's alive or dead or if he exit scanned, but the snake, he was interviewed by Wired Magazine, and he had said that, I2P was the future for darknets, and that Alphabet was solely going to be hosted on I2P with mirrors on Tor. So I think in terms of CSAM and human trafficking, things of that nature, I think that we're going to see a rise in tandem with I2P users also being on creating platforms, forums, and things of that nature on I2P. And I think it's going to be interesting to see, especially with the newer darknets that have come about within the past couple of years, built on blockchains like ZeroNet and LokiNet. I'd be curious to see if there's going to be a following of suit with that, where there's now going to be a presence on there for that type of material.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Carolina or Richard, did you guys have anything to add on what you guys are seeing in that space as well?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
go ahead. No,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I didn't know that I2P had received that large of a user acceptance. I thought it was more still at a prototype level.
Yeah, I would say the same thing specifically for CSAM. The main issue here being how this OPSEC is going to be built. So there's a reason here inside the darknet community that they might be shifting from an environment where the OPSEC protocols were already all written, that is the Tor network with the conventional CSAM forms, to a network that is distributed. And there's a rising concern of whether those IPs are going to be exposed, what is really the protocol for really sharing this kind of materials inside an I2P network. But besides that, there is at least one very good enthusiast of I2P networks inside Darkweb CSAM forums. So guys, a guy that is constantly uploading material there. And we have been seeing at least 2 forums that have already appeared with alternatives to Tor inside the I2P. They are not exclusive, so I2P forums or environments, but they play as an alternative to what is currently existing at the dark web right now.
Okay, that's really interesting. Now, when you one of the things that's always sort of fascinating about the shifts and where law enforcement and other agencies sort of need to focus their efforts, are you seeing any trends where more sophisticated groups are moving from, like you said, some of those networks which have been subject to compromise in the past to really isolated, probably true darknets, knowing that there's multiple darknets, things like Freenet, or are you kind of seeing the trends there? We're still looking at distribution pools where there's a larger audience. What are you guys sort of seeing in that space?
I would say for the distribution of the material itself, Freenet and IPFS, the Interplanetary File System, I feel the data on those networks actually eclipse what is on Tor and I2P, because I think of Tor and I2P as like the traditional internet sites where you go to a site and you can view content on the site. But if you're actually looking to accrue and download data to your device, Freenet obviously it's distributed. Same thing with IPFS. You're going to be able to get a lot of data that's being shared by multiple people in an anonymous type environment. So I think with Freenet, which has been around for 20 years, IPFS I think is coming on its 8-year anniversary, if I'm not mistaken. You're always going to have that, and I like to equate it to like those old FTP sites you could pull up on the internet when people were sharing on FTP sites. They weren't necessarily sites that had any type of design or allure to them. It was just, you know, bare bones downloading off of downloading files, and I think that that is always going to be prevalent with the usage of Freenet and IPFS. But for the lay user per se, the person who's just trying to find the material online and do things like that, I would say that you know, Tor is still heavily traversed, but I think we're going to see more of a presence on the alternate darknets now.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and that barrier to entry is probably a key measure there, right? Like, and who or what type of audience that's going to attract, and then how you can actually target that from a law enforcement perspective. So no, that's quite fascinating. It leads into probably, you know, the next topic, I guess, that we want to explore, which is really around the cryptocurrencies as the, you know, the foundation of some of these activities, and then get your guys' perspective. And probably start with yourself, Carolina, on both TRM's analysis and what you guys are seeing, and how, you know, follow the money is an approach, and then the contrast between that and where you're seeing distribution of content which isn't economics based, and what you guys are seeing in that from a trends perspective. So yeah, hand over to you for your insights there.
Yeah, maybe the most interesting insight we have on the environment here is what we call the system scammers. That is the ability of seeing inside the blockchain which kind of websites that promote themselves as commercial websites really don't work. And what is particularly interesting when we see system data inside the blockchain is that we are talking about a specific category of criminals that they are per nature collectors. So what does it mean is that they are not going to interact once with a system entity, with a system vendor. They're going to interact with those multiple times. And for us, this creates a very interesting situation where we have many system threat actors interacting with many system entities randomly. And the group that all this data creates allows us to derive some very interesting insights. So for example, we can see very clearly how after interacting with one page, a bunch of other criminals rapidly moves to another system page, indicating for us that this page they are interacting with likely doesn't open. It's a scam. And it's very interesting to put this data, this blockchain intelligence data that we have inside the off-chain context, because it can situate to us how those networks of system threat actors are organized. So for example, for the system scam, their main objective there is to generate profits. So what they're doing is that they are creating inside the dark web a structure of the location of the websites and everything, that so whoever is gonna pay for the first entity that is a system scam is gonna find the second system scam controlled by the same network much more easy than it's gonna find another network controlled by someone else. So this is a way that the system criminals, they can guarantee that you're going to pay not once to a system scam, you're going to pay twice, 3 times to the same system scam network without even knowing it, because it will appear just like it's a different website, it has a different design. So this is something that we can only see actually through blockchain intelligence. And yeah, that's the power of the insight here.
That's really interesting. So looking at, like you said, you're following the money to start identifying patterns to see where it might be from a scammer side, but that's going to start to support illuminating investigation points. Keven or Richard, do you guys have anything to add on that?
I'm just curious, when you have the people advertising the materials, are there any like honeypots being put in place to try and attract those same user communities?
Yes, so I have no doubt that around the dark web environment, there might be a bunch of honeypots They might work differently and everything, but the thing that the blockchain is a public ledger allows us to see exactly what is going on. And what is super interesting about the blockchain is that sometimes whoever is gonna tip off a system criminal, a system vendor, is exactly the consumer that was interacting with a system entity elsewhere. That's super interesting because this allows us to bring this knowledge that we have of social networks inside the real world. So street crime, to put this together to analyze virtual crime. So people who are interacting with an anonymous environment, so they don't really know actually who the next criminal is. But what we have here in common is that they all are looking for the same thing. And so it's very interesting when we analyze that two different system threat actors that have been interacting with very different entities that were located in very different geolocations inside the dark web, they're going to end up in the same place. So being able to explain why it happens is already super insightful. And yeah, the thing here is using the transparency that we have with the blockchain to generate insights. And from here, allow also a perspective where it becomes much easier. So for law enforcement or whoever is taking care of this environment to see not blockchain data as isolated piece of data, but as a whole big picture that interacts with a bunch of other small networks and everything. So we can, from here, derive a much more broader insight. Yeah.
And how big a problem are the privacy-oriented coins for you in tracking the blockchain analytics of these types of things?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question because for me, it brings the question how those privacy coins are being used by system criminals. And something very interesting about those is that most of the times, as a system threat actor writes in a guide on how to use privacy coins, is that most of the times you cannot buy them. So you need somehow to exchange one coin for another coin. So what is particularly interesting about this situation is that we might, if we don't understand how things are operating very well, we might lose track of the insight here, because the majority of criminals that will at some point operate with privacy coins, they will start with the very Bitcoin, which they will create just like an environment of moving the coin in a very specific way, where you allow so whoever wants to buy the content and everything, so the demand side of the thing should still operate in Bitcoin while you protect so the vendors, the website OPSEC through those privacy coins. And this is very important also when you talk about compliance, because it shows us the situation that so it's very important to have just at those exchanging points a very good compliance system, so a very good intelligence system that is able to signalize you at the very point. So those criminals are going to try to exchange so Bitcoin for Monero, for example, that this is a Bitcoin coming from a system website, for example. So here is the insightful point, yeah, on just like mapping those networks, how they operate, and how privacy coins actually enter this discussion.
Yeah, it would also seem to me then the instructions for dealing with the privacy coins would be another opening for the CSAM scammers.
Yeah. Yeah, if you think about it, so privacy coins become very interesting for the system scammers too, because the obfuscation path that is created doesn't allow anyone to kind of see that it's a scam. But even around the system scammers, so this very difficulty of getting so a Monero, a Zcash to transact with creates an environment where so the Monero, Zcashes, they appear, but they appear always as an alternative to Bitcoin, Ethereum, or elsewhere that has a more current circulation, you know, so that's you can buy, you can trade. And for system criminals, as they themselves say, creates an environment where you're not raising suspicions around yourself. So you are just buying a coin that is of traditional use and everything. So this is also part of the OPSEC scenario they are creating here.
So
That
Caroline,
was
just on that as well. I'm curious about the scale and particularly how TRM sort of tackling that problem set. Because like you said, when you're starting to map those networks and those inflection points from traditionally easier to trace coins into the privacy coin space, how is, I guess, your organization and what you guys are doing, how are you handling that level of scale and analysis with your teams?
So as you said, so I cannot comment so specifically on the Moneros, but what is very important for us to understand here is that the Monero problem with the system does not start with a Monero address, because what might happen is most of the time we're going to see the Monero addresses inside, so a donation address of a dark web system form or something that is more public. And every time you see that, we must understand the criminal logic behind it. So they want to give so system threat actors an easy way to pay, and that is a way that so whoever is generating these addresses doesn't need to generate one address every time someone asks for a donation. So what they are doing is they are just like advertising so all this Monero infrastructure, so as a way so to create this perception that they are operating in Monero, and as a way to create an easy way to handle the donations to the forum or whatever. But we must understand that the commercial part of the system, which is not so donations forum, which is free of charge, so you can enter a dark web system forum without paying anything. The commercial side of it is still works with Bitcoin, and never mind what so the operators of the websites are going to do. So they will start with Bitcoin. That is the only coin that even system criminals consider safe for system threat actors to operate. Because even so, from a system threat actor perspective, they say it's not so easy, and they will not recommend to anyone. So we start operating in Monero, you know, because I cannot guarantee what you're going to do with that, and I will not be responsible for your OPSEC error. So they are saying, if you are a newbie, please stay with Bitcoin and bear with me. So to pay whatever you're going to pay in Bitcoin, and then you're going to just handle your OPSEC from our side. So this is why it's important to have exactly at those exchanging points, this kind of intelligence. So someone to signalize you, this is a route in Bitcoin, this is a system cryptocurrency addresses, and exactly on the speed of those alerts, on how fast we can attribute this data, on how we attribute this data. So to guarantee that this intelligence exists is how, so we enter here the discussion to actually signalize to those exchanging points what is going on and elevate the risk for system criminals of actually operating in this kind of points.
No, fascinating. I appreciate the insights there and the work you guys are doing to sort of map that out. I'm sure it's supremely valuable to law enforcement efforts and creating force multiplier to what is a resource constrained environment. Probably taking a bit of a change in tact here to delve into some of your work, Richard. The work you have done previously that we sort of captured in your intro around creating anonymized communication pathways, you know, authoritarian countries or oppressed environments. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? It's quite fascinating.
Okay, one of the things we did was we did set up one tool that actually sort of took a lot of lessons from the criminal botnets with some of the fast flux and double fast flux methods for hiding who's talking to who, and also to avoid for example, the countries identifying that people are using Tor and that type of thing. Another thing we've done, we had a contract where we've taken, for example, Tor browser outputs, and we translated into other protocols. One of the favorites when I explain it is we take the browser output and we can translate it into Minecraft video game sessions. And that actually gets through a lot of the national firewalls, in part because those countries don't want to anger the gamer communities. The gamer communities are young people that are tech savvy, and they would really rather that they be spending their time on video games rather than organizing themselves with on political issues. One of the applications that we had too is we've been supporting United Nations Development Program project in southern Chad, where there are victims of gender-based violence. There's Boko Haram active in the region and a lot of that. And so there what we would do is the paralegals would have handsets and they would collect information. We would have them then go through Tor to our backend, which was an onion server. We use Tor. The Chad government is not, it's a very controlling government, even though it's Western oriented, and in particular, female organizers in the poor parts of the country probably could have a number of groups that don't like them. So we don't want that to be organized. We did look at, one of the issues we looked at is, for example, if you paid attention lately, there's been information with Team Camry. They've been selling NetFlow data. So that would be one of the ways that you could possibly trace, well, actually, some of the law enforcement groups use that to trace pathways through the network through multiple hops, like the Tor network. And so one of the things we did was with our tool, this was funded by the European Union. With our tool, we sent the connections through a new network prototyping tool called Fabric that we're a part of here. The Fabric allows you to instrument and reprogram all levels of the network except for the physical layer. And so we then we sent our connections through that and into the Onion server. And we actually, I was impressed, the Onion servers do a better job of aggregating the connection so that all of the flows are put together, which makes it much harder to identify a specific flow from a handset to a specific connection to the Onion server. It's not that you would have, say, the packet, the volume of packets or the packet delays that would go up through one side and come out the other. You would have all of the flows going in and they would be aggregated into one pipe going into the Onion server. So it is actually more difficult to detect who's using the Onion server than I would have expected. And the Onion servers are better than say if you had a website and people were going to the website through Tor. It's also more difficult to trace those connections.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, some of the stuff, particularly at the start there when you're talking about how you're obfuscating through, what is sort of ubiquitous activities, to support communications in those environments. One of the questions I guess the segues or tangents there that would be interesting to discuss is you're doing it for victims of violence and different, I guess, access into, oppressed environments. The work that we sort of see and do in sort of the African landscape as well, with where orphans are targeted and then turned into, go into the trafficking pipelines of, whether that's for labor, sexual abuse, or, all sorts of different economies there, from not just, Boko Haram, but other threat groups, obviously, and opportunistic threat groups and criminal organizations. The ability, and I love the question here is really around, do you see opportunities to support communication pathways directly with victims using these anonymized, communication technologies in the same way that happens during uprisings or other sort of more state-on-state conflict, which we've seen in other environments such as the Arab Spring and pathways?
There are various applications of this type of thing, such as for support groups. I know that the Tor project, some of the user communities that they're more proud of are, for example, for battered women, or then for women that are victims of sexual exploitation, that they can then have groups where they can communicate and avoid being tracked by the various people that are trying to track them. I have a anecdote that might be of interest as well. One of the journalists that I trained, when he went back to Gambia, and that was when Gambia was being ruled by Yahya Jammeh, the U.S. State Department listed Gambia as one of the countries that had a lot of sexual exploitation, in particular sexual exploitation of minors. And so he tried to have an interview with the police officials to discuss that problem with them. And when he contacted the national police about their country being identified as a hotspot of child sexual exploitation, the police started threatening to lock him up and he had to flee the country, which gives you an idea as to how bad the problem was there, right? Interestingly enough, when Yahya Jammeh fell, he was able to go back and he was actually the spokesperson for the government for a few years after that, which I find positive.
No, interesting, and I think I appreciate some of the insights there, and without going into too much, probably from the geopolitical side, and just looking at the coming up to sort of close to the end of the panel, I'd love to switch back to Keven really quickly and look at some of the future insights, particularly around public-private partnerships, the homeostasis between law enforcement and private sector, and how all that sort of how you're seeing that happen from your side as you're sort of working on both elements, and just the different perspectives also from the TRM team on what they see as well. So probably Keven, starting with you, what are you seeing there as future trends, and again the public-private partnership opportunities here?
Yeah, I honestly think that there's been a great progression, specifically with cooperation with exchanges and law enforcement. Traditionally, and I'll say it here, and I don't care, Binance used to be very difficult to work with. Now they are doing great. They're very responsive to law enforcement. And the same analytic tools that law enforcement have for the blockchain, the private sector can have as well. And those exchanges, the tier one exchanges, they're able to see like anomalous activity. They're able to see that, hey, this certain wallet is all of a sudden receiving massive amounts of crypto that are coming from unattributable wallets. So it's not that they're buying cryptocurrency, it's cryptocurrency being sent. And a lot of exchanges, they're doing suspicious activity reports, they're flagging customers. And I think that that's really how you're going to have a boots on the ground approach, because realistically, especially when it comes to privacy coins, there's not a lot of tier one exchanges that you can purchase privacy coins at, specifically Monero. Kraken is really the first one I could think of. But for a lot of exchanges, you actually have to exchange the coins for the privacy coins for Monero. You can't just purchase it with fiat currency. And to say, hey, this person is purchasing a lot of these privacy coins and then they're sending it to outside wallets, you know, that in and of itself, hey, should this be somebody that we're looking at, right? And I don't like to view it with that Orwellian Big Brother aspect where, the government is going to be, because we're the good guys, right? We're the good guys looking at people who are doing bad things. And like Richard said, hey, reverse the script. What if we're the bad guys? We're the authoritarian Orwellian Big Brother looking for the good guys, right? But I do feel that there has to be a better homeostasis with private sector, specifically in the crypto sphere, to flag this activity and to say, hey, how did this person who opened an account all of a sudden start getting this influx of cryptocurrency into their account? Like, where is this cryptocurrency coming from? At least ask the question and work with law enforcement to report the individuals, especially if you see something coming from a flagged, a sanctioned service, something OFAC has sanctioned, or something that's on the radar for being in the sphere or in the exposure to something that's related to human trafficking or child exploitation. Something I could think of is an over-the-counter OFAC sanctioned Suex. How great that they got shut down because of their nexus to ransomware. And I think in terms of combating, labor trafficking, human trafficking, to really have a proactive effort to flag certain over-the-counter services, certain attributable to criminal activity services that are touching these tier one exchanges and any type of exchange, really. That would be a great way for there to be a progression towards stomping out this stuff.
May I pose a question? Which is, have you had difficulties with, say, some gray market activities? I know that, for example, the medical marijuana industry uses a number of the private coins because they're legal in the States, but illegal federally. And I'm just wondering if their use of these technologies has been an issue that you're aware of.
I think the biggest issue with privacy coins in general is the fact that they're not very easy to get. And I really feel that the biggest impact that happened in the dark web, at least in the past year, was Kilos, the very successful swapping exchange for Litecoin, Bitcoin, and Monero, exit scamming everybody because a lot of people were using Kilos. And it was very easy to launder money as a vendor or launder money as somebody on the dark web through Kilos and then send it back to my compliant exchange where I would cash it out because you can't, and I always use this adage, you can't go to McDonald's and buy the Big Mac with Bitcoin or Monero. You have to convert it in some way that you can use it. And in the gray area markets, that, like you said, medical marijuana or things of that nature, I think the biggest issue that they have is people actually getting the privacy coins to use them. And I think for the most part, traditionally, darknet markets that have been only Monero have not been successful up until Alphabet. And I think that, if privacy coins expand, if there's more of a push for tier one exchanges to get privacy coins on them that you could buy with ACH checking or credit cards, I think that it's going to change, really change the game for just traditional acceptance of Bitcoin and Ethereum. I think there's going to be more of a push towards Monero and privacy oriented coins.
Just want to pass over to you, Carolina, for sort of your final insights before we wrap up the panel. Did you have any particular insights from TRM's perspective on public-private partnerships and some of the opportunities there?
Yeah, I think this is a topic very, very interesting because something we often don't realize is that what is the impact of attribution? So every time I find a system address and say to the TRM tool, this is a system address. So exchangers and customers who are actually law enforcement also, who are looking at these environments, they will receive an alert. And actually this ability of being able at real time to share information with law enforcement that are looking at the tool and with exchangers, this allows for us a unique opportunity of actually having those bad coins being actually blocked, So at the time, so for example, I attribute a wallet or an address as CSAM related. At the time, this actor is going to try to cash out at a compliant exchanger that has this kind of intelligence in hand. He's going to be identified. He or she is going to be identified, So this is how important it is. So for us to consider here the power of having blockchain intelligence as a way of actually sharing information. So if law enforcement says, oh, this is something very bad, let's monitor those wallets, there is a way of actually issuing an alert so that all exchangers can be aware of that. And at the moment that the system criminal or whoever is trying to cash out, they will receive an alert. It seems to me that the biggest problem that we are seeing here in the environment is that people often don't realize how impactful or how much is needed to do this intelligence work. Because most of the times we do know that system criminals are operating in Bitcoin or whatever, but where is this data, So we do need to have someone there that is actually tracing the funds. The funds are not directly going to an exchanger or whatever. They are being layered through multiple forms. So we do have to have this active intelligence to be able to properly signalize the network of compliant exchangers, law enforcement, what is actually going on. And this allows, I said, a unique opportunity of partnership. So where everyone works together actually to combat this crime. The more compliant exchangers we have, the more people we have inside this network that wants to combat financial crime. The more people we have with this intelligence, the higher the chances that those criminals identified, we are increasing the risk for people to do bad stuff inside the blockchain. When we expand the intelligence, when we create an environment where this intelligence on bad guys is being shared. So this is also, yeah, the unseen part here that's super impactful from my point of view.
No, that's great, and I appreciate your insights there, and thanks very much to everyone on the panel for diving into what is a tough and complex problem set and exploring some of these questions. We've come up to the top of the hour, and we're going to wrap up the panel now. I would like to say a big thanks to Carolina, Richard, and Keven for joining us today, sharing your insights and giving your valuable time with your knowledge and hopefully sparking some different thought chains for others who will be listening to this. So thanks very much, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.